Hey everyone! Tonight we're drifting back to the windswept coasts of the 18th century. We're going to spend some time with the lighthouse keepers, the solitary guardians of the shore, men who lived their lives in towers of stone and iron, watching the sea, tending the light, keeping vigil through fog and storm and the long, quiet hours of the night. This isn't a story of dramatic shipwrecks or heroic rescues, though those certainly happened. Instead, we're going to settle into the daily rhythm of lighthouse life, the small tasks, the routines, the way time moved differently when you were perched between land and sea, between day and night, watching and waiting. We'll follow Thomas through an entire year at Street Catherine's Light, a lighthouse on the English coast. We'll experience each season with him, the bitter cold of January, the storms of March, the gentle warmth of June, the harvest of September, the return to darkness in December. We'll climb those 73 stone steps with him, again and again. We'll tend the lamps, polish the reflectors, watch the sea in all its moods. This is slow storytelling, quiet, detailed, the kind of history that lives in small moments rather than grand events. So get comfortable. Let the sound of distant waves wash over you. Breathe slowly, and let's begin our year with Thomas. In the deep cold of January 1784. The year begins in deep winter. Thomas has been keeper of Street Catherine's Light for 3 years now. He knows every stone of the tower, every creak of the lantern room in the wind, every loose board in the floor of his small chamber. But January is always the hardest month, the coldest, the darkest, in a way that has nothing to do with the hours of daylight, but rather with a quality of the season itself. A heaviness, a stillness, broken only by the wind. On the first day of the year, Thomas wakes at 5 in the morning, as he does every morning. His small room at the base of the tower is cold enough that frost has formed on the inside of the window. Not just a light film, but thick enough to create patterns. Delicate ferns of ice, spirals and halls. He watches these patterns for a moment before rising, his breath visible in the air, hanging there in small clouds before dissipating. The tower has 3 levels, each with its own purpose, its own character. The ground floor, where Thomas sleeps and keeps his stores, is the darkest. The walls are thick stone, barely any light coming through the narrow windows, but it stays relatively warm, insulated by all that mass of rock and earth. His bed is in one corner, narrow but sufficient, a straw mattress over rope supports, blankets piled thick. Wool blankets that Mary made years ago, when they were first married. They still smell faintly of her, or perhaps that's just his imagination. Against one wall are his stores, sacks of flour, oats, dried beans, ceramic jars of oil, both for the lamps and for cooking, a barrel of salt pork, another of salt cod, dried apples in a wooden box, onions and potatoes in bins, covered with cloth to keep them in the dark. Everything carefully organized, everything accounted for. Running short of supplies in January can mean going hungry, or worse. Thomas is meticulous about his inventory. The middle room is where he lives most of his waking hours when he's not in the lantern room above. This is where he has his table and chair, his small iron stove, his few books, his logbook. The windows here are larger, letting in more light. On a clear day, he can see for miles across the water. On a day like today, he can see the grey waves marching toward the shore, endless ranks of them, white foam on their crests where the wind catches them. And at the top, reached by those 73 stone steps worn smooth by decades of feet, is the lantern room. This is the heart of the lighthouse. This is why everything else exists. The room is circular, perhaps 12 feet across, entirely surrounded by windows except for the small door and the mechanism housing. In the centre sits the light itself. Thomas dresses slowly in the cold morning air, layering clothes against the chill that seems to seep up from the stone floor. First, his shirt. Heavy linen, yellowed with age and washing. Then a wool shirt over that, the weave rough against his skin but warm. A waistcoat next, buttoned carefully. Thick wool stockings, darned in places where they'd worn through. His boots, which he keeps by the bed so they won't be quite so cold when he puts them on. Even so, the leather is stiff with cold. He works his feet into them slowly, laces them up. A coat that's seen better days but still holds the wind at bay. The fabric is worn thin at the elbows, and there's a patch on one shoulder where he tore it on a nail and had to mend it himself. His stitching isn't as neat as Mary's would have been, but it holds. Finally, a knitted cap, dark blue wool. Mary made it the last winter before she died. He pulls it down over his ears, feeling the warmth of it. Before he climbs the stairs, he needs to eat something. His body requires fuel for the day's work, especially in this cold. He has porridge, made the night before, and left to sit in its pot. It's cold now, congealed into a thick mass, but he eats it anyway. Spooning it into a wooden bowl, eating it standing by the small window, watching the sky slowly lighten over the sea. The water is grey this morning, the colour of slate or pewter. The waves are choppy with whitecaps. A wind from the north, he notes. That means cold air coming down from the Arctic. It might bring snow. He watches the sky, reading it the way some men read newspapers. The clouds are high and thin. No immediate threat of snow, then. But it's coming. He can feel it. After eating, he washes his bowl and spoon in a basin of water. The water is so cold it makes his hands ache. He dries the bowl, puts it away, everything in its place. Order is important when you live alone. It's too easy to let things slide into chaos, and chaos makes everything harder. Now he begins his climb. 73 steps. His knees know each one. There's the third step that's worn a bit more on the left side. The 17th step that's slightly higher than the others. The 42nd step where there's a small chip in the stone. His body knows this spiral, has climbed it thousands of times. Up and up, the walls of the tower close around him, the windows just narrow slits that let in the cold and the sound of the wind. The climb takes several minutes. Thomas doesn't rush. He's learned that rushing leads to breathlessness, to strain. Better to move at a steady pace, to let his body warm with the exertion. By the time he reaches the top, his breath is coming a bit faster, but not laboured. He pushes open the trapdoor and emerges into the lantern room. The cold hits him immediately. The lantern room is much colder than the levels below because it's all windows, exposed to the wind on every side. But the view is extraordinary, 360 degrees of sea and sky. On a clear day, he can see 20 miles or more. Today, visibility is perhaps 10 miles, enough to see several ships moving along the coast, dark shapes against the grey water. In the centre of the room sits the light. During Thomas's time as keeper, the light is produced by a series of argand lamps. These are a relatively new invention, much improved over the simple oil lamps of earlier decades. Each lamp has a circular wick, hollow in the middle, which allows air to flow both inside and outside the flame. This makes the flame burn much brighter and more steadily than a flat wick would. There are 8 lamps arranged in a circle on an iron framework. Behind each lamp is a parabolic reflector made of polished metal, silver-plated copper. Specifically, though the silver is wearing thin in places and needs to be repolished regularly, these reflectors are crucial They gather the light from the lamps and focus it, sending it out to sea in concentrated beams rather than letting it dissipate in all directions. The framework of lamps and reflectors sits on a circular base that rotates. The rotation is driven by clockwork, powered by a heavy weight on a chain. The weight hangs down through the centre of the tower, descending through holes in the floors of the rooms below. As the weight slowly falls, pulled by gravity, it turns gears that rotate the lamp framework. The rotation is slow, deliberate. The entire assembly makes one complete rotation every 2 minutes. This creates a pattern of light. Flash, dark, flash, dark. 2 bright flashes per minute, with darkness between. Each lighthouse has its own pattern. This is how ships identify which lighthouse they're seeing. Street Catherine's light, 2 flashes per minute. The lighthouse at Portland Bill, 20 miles south, 3 flashes per minute. The one at Start Point, further down the coast, 1 long flash every minute. These patterns are published in charts and sailing directions, and every ship's captain knows them. But this morning, of course, the lamps are extinguished. They burn only at night. Thomas's work at dawn is to check everything, clean, maintain, prepare for the night ahead. He begins with the reflectors. Each one must be polished daily. Salt spray from the sea, even this high up, leaves a fine film on the metal. If left unpolished, the reflectors quickly become tarnished and their ability to focus the light degrades. Thomas has a collection of soft cloths kept in a wooden box, pieces of old linen, worn soft with use. He takes one now and begins to polish the first reflector. The motion is circular, methodical, small circles, working across the curved surface of the reflector. The metal gleams under his hands, catching what little light comes through the grey sky. He can see his face reflected in it, distorted by the curve. A thin face, weathered by wind and salt air. Grey hair, though he's only 43. Eyes that have spent years squinting at distant horizons. This is meditative work. The kind of task where your hands know what to do and your mind can wander. Thomas thinks about the ships that passed in the night. He saw 3 sets of lights, one quite close to shore, moving slowly southward. Probably a coastal trader, hugging the land. Another far out, barely visible on the horizon. That one might have been a naval vessel or a deep-sea merchantman, and one that appeared around midnight, heading north. That one he watched for a while because it seemed to be having trouble, moving erratically. Perhaps the crew was drunk, perhaps there was damage, but eventually it steadied and continued on its way. He polishes each reflector in turn, 8 reflectors, 8 careful cleanings. His hands move in the same circles, over and over. The rhythm is soothing. There's no need to think about what he's doing. His body knows. After the reflectors, the glass. The lantern room is encased in panes of thick glass to protect the flames from the wind. Without the glass, the wind would blow the lamps out immediately. With it, the flames can burn steady, even in a gale. But the glass must be kept clean. Salt spray, bird droppings, rain that leaves mineral deposits. All of it accumulates and dims the light. Thomas opens the small door that leads to the gallery. This is a narrow walkway, perhaps 18 inches wide, that circles the outside of the lantern room. It has an iron railing, waist high, painted black. The paint is flaking in places. He makes a mental note to touch it up when the weather improves. The wind hits him immediately when he steps outside, bitter cold, carrying spray from the waves breaking against the rocks 60 feet below. The gallery has no shelter. It's completely exposed. Thomas keeps one hand on the railing always when he's out here. The drop is sheer, 60 feet to the rocks, and the rocks are sharp, unforgiving. A fall would be fatal. He works his way around the gallery, cleaning the outside of the glass pane by pane. Each pane is about 2 feet wide and 3 feet tall. Heavy glass, thick enough to withstand the impact of birds that sometimes fly into it at night, confused by the light. He uses a different cloth for the outside glass, one that's slightly rougher. The salt spray deposits are stubborn and need more abrasion to remove. His fingers grow numb despite his gloves. The wind cuts through the wool, finds every gap. He works steadily, methodically, not rushing. Rushing leads to mistakes. A missed spot, a pane not quite clean. And at night, every bit of dirt or salt reduces the effectiveness of the light. The sun is fully up now, though you wouldn't know it by the brightness. The sky is overcast, a uniform grey from horizon to horizon, but it's daylight, at least. Thomas can see the coast to the north and south. Rocky headlands, small beaches where the waves break in white foam. In the distance to the west, barely visible through the murk, are hills. On a clear day, you can see for 30 miles inland. Today, the hills are just darker smudges against the grey sky. He finishes the outside glass and goes back inside, grateful for even the minimal shelter the lantern room provides. His hands are so cold they've gone past pain to a kind of numbness. He pulls off his gloves and tucks his hands under his arms, waiting for feeling to return. The returning warmth brings pins and needles, a prickling sensation that's almost painful. He breathes slowly, waiting it out. When he can feel his fingers again, he cleans the inside of the glass panes. This is easier, out of the wind, and the inside glass is less dirty. Just dust, mostly. A film of soot from the lamps. He works around the circle of windows, cloth moving in smooth arcs. Next, he checks the oil supply. The lamps consume several gallons of oil each night. More in winter when the nights are long, less in summer. Thomas keeps his supply in large ceramic jars, stored in the middle room. He goes down the stairs, his knees protesting slightly at the descent. Down is sometimes harder than up. The middle room is warmer than the lantern room. Thomas can feel the difference immediately. He goes to the corner where the oil jars are stored. Each jar holds about 5 gallons. He counts them, 13 full ones remaining. At this time of year, with nights of 14 or 15 hours, he goes through roughly 1 jar every 2 nights, so he has perhaps 3 weeks of oil left, maybe a bit more if he's careful. The supply boat is due in about 2 weeks, weather permitting. That should be fine, but January is unpredictable. If a storm keeps the boat from coming, he could run short. Thomas makes a note in his log to be especially careful with the oil. To trim the wicks precisely, not too high. To make sure the oil reservoirs aren't overfilled, which can cause spillage. The log sits on a small desk in the middle room. A large leather-bound book, perhaps 18 inches tall and 12 inches wide. The pages are thick paper, lined. Each page represents one day. Thomas records everything: weather conditions, wind, direction, and strength. Visibility, ships sighted, including their apparent type and course. Oil consumed, maintenance performed, any unusual events. He opens the log to today's date, takes up his pen, a simple quill that he cuts and maintains himself, dips it in the inkwell. His handwriting is careful, deliberate, not elegant, but clear and legible. January 1st, 1784. Clear morning, wind from north, moderate strength, visibility approximately 10 miles. 3 ships sighted during night watch. 1 coastal trader southbound at 8 o'clock. 1 vessel far offshore at 11 o'clock heading south. 1 northbound vessel at midnight. All lamps functioning properly. 8 reflectors polished. All window panes cleaned inside and outside. Oil supply 13 jars remaining. Weather, grey sky, temperature well below freezing. Frost on windows. Writing this takes several minutes. Thomas is not a fast writer, but he's careful. The log might be inspected by the Trinity House authorities who oversee the lighthouse. More importantly, the log is a record. If something goes wrong, if a ship is lost, the authorities will want to know what the lighthouse keeper saw, what the conditions were. The log is Thomas's testimony to his diligence, his attention to duty. After updating the log, Thomas tends to his own needs. There's water to fetch from the well, 100 yards down the path from the tower. In summer, this is a pleasant walk, a chance to stretch his legs and feel grass beneath his feet. In January, it's a cold trudge through wind and sometimes mud or ice, carrying heavy buckets. He puts on his coat again, picks up 2 wooden buckets, opens the heavy door at the base of the tower. The wind immediately tries to snatch the door from his hands. He holds it firmly, steps outside, pulls the door closed behind him. The path to the well is rocky and uneven. It winds down the slope, away from the tower, through low scrub vegetation, gorse bushes, tough and thorny. Heather, brown and dormant in winter. The ground is hard with frost, crunching under his boots. The well is stone-lined, perhaps 4 feet across and 30 feet deep, very old, built when the tower was constructed decades ago. The water comes from an underground spring, and it's always cold and always clean. Thomas has drunk from this well for 3 years and never been sick from it. He sets down his buckets, takes up the well bucket. This is a wooden bucket, smaller than his carrying buckets, with a long rope attached. He lowers it carefully, hand over hand, letting the rope slide through his palms. He hears the distant splash when the bucket hits water, waits a moment for it to fill, then begins pulling it up. This is hard work. The bucket weighs perhaps 30 pounds when full of water. Thomas pulls steadily, hand over hand, the rope rough against his palms, even through his gloves. Up and up. Finally, the bucket emerges from the well. He swings it over to the stone lip, pours the water into one of his carrying buckets, lowers the well bucket again, another splash, another long pull, another bucketful of water. When both carrying buckets are full, he begins the walk back to the tower. The buckets are heavy, perhaps 40 pounds each. He carries one in each hand, trying to balance the weight. Water sloshes with each step. He has to move carefully on the uneven path. A fall could mean spilled water, and he'd have to make the trip again. Back at the tower, up the 2 steps to the door. Inside, out of the wind. He stores the water in a large ceramic crock in the corner of the ground floor. This will be for drinking, cooking, and washing over the next day or 2. Water is precious here. Every drop must be carried up from the well. In summer, he sometimes needs to make 3 trips a day. In winter, 2 trips usually suffice, since he sweats less and uses less water for washing. The morning is passing now. Thomas checks his pocket watch, a battered brass timepiece that belonged to his father. 9:30, time for a proper breakfast. He goes up to the middle room, adds coal to his stove. The stove is a simple iron box with a door on the front and a stovepipe that goes up through the ceiling and out through the roof. It burns coal or wood, though coal is better because it burns hotter and longer. He has eggs, precious because they're brought by the supply boat and don't keep forever. But he allows himself 2 eggs this morning, the first day of the year, a small celebration. He cracks them into a pan, watches them sizzle and pop in a bit of oil. The smell is wonderful, rich and savoury. He has bread, too, which he baked 3 days ago. It's getting hard now, but he can toast it over the stove. and that makes it more palatable. He cuts 2 thick slices, holds them on a fork over the stove's heat until they're brown and crispy. And he has tea. This is his greatest luxury. Tea is expensive, but Thomas allows himself 1 cup each day. He boils water in his kettle, measures out the tea leaves carefully, just enough for 1 strong cup. He pours the boiling water over the leaves, waits for it to steep, watching the water turn brown. He sits at the small table in the middle room and eats his breakfast slowly. The eggs are perfect, the yolks still runny. He breaks them with his toast, soaking up the yellow richness. Outside the window, the sea continues its endless motion, waves rising and falling. The rhythm never stops. It's been like this since before humans walked the earth, and it will continue long after. Thomas drinks his tea slowly, savouring each sip. The warmth spreads through him, the taste is bitter and complex. He drinks it without sugar, without milk. Just the tea and the hot water. Perfect. After breakfast, there's always maintenance to do. The tower is constantly in need of small repairs. Wood swells and shrinks with moisture and temperature. Metal corrodes in the salt air. Stone cracks. Nothing lasts without constant attention. Today, Thomas notices that one of the window shutters on the ground floor is loose. The wood has shrunk in the cold, dry air, and the latch no longer catches properly. He gets his tools from a wooden chest. Hammer, nails of various sizes, a small chisel, a saw, files, a plane. These are the tools that keep the lighthouse functioning. He examines the shutter carefully. The latch itself is fine, but the striker plate has loosened. 2 of the screws that hold it to the door frame have worked themselves loose. Thomas removes them completely, sees that the wood where they were has become compressed, no longer gripping the screw threads properly. He takes small slivers of wood, whittles them with his knife to the right size, taps them into the screw holes. This gives the screws something fresh to grip. Then he replaces the screws, tightening them carefully. The latch catches now, firm and secure. This takes the better part of an hour. When it's done, he tests the shutter several times, opening and closing, making sure the latch catches solidly each time. Satisfied, he puts away his tools. The afternoon passes in similar small tasks. There's always something. Thomas inspects the rope that raises and lowers the lamp weight, checks it for fraying, finds one spot where a few strands have broken. Not dangerous yet, but worth noting. He'll need to replace this rope within the next few months. He checks the clockwork mechanism that rotates the lamps. This is delicate work. Gears and pinions, all of which must be kept clean and lightly oiled. He uses a small brush to remove any dust, then applies drops of oil to the bearing surfaces. The mechanism turns smoothly, quietly. Good. As he works, Thomas thinks about his wife, Mary. These quiet tasks remind him of her. She was always busy with her hands, sewing, knitting, cooking, preserving food. She never sat idle. Even when they were talking in the evening, her hands would be moving, knitting needles clicking together, creating warmth from wool. She would have been good at lighthouse keeping, he thinks. She had the temperament for it, patient, careful, able to find satisfaction in small accomplishments. But women aren't lighthouse keepers. It's not considered appropriate. And besides, Mary is gone now, 2 years. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago. He finishes his inspection of the mechanism, climbs back down to the middle room. The light is beginning to fade now. In January, full darkness comes early. By 4:30, the sun is setting. What little sun there was behind the cloud. This is when Thomas's real work begins. He climbs the stairs again to the lantern room, carrying a can of oil. fills each lamp reservoir carefully, using a small funnel to avoid spills. Each reservoir holds about a pint of oil, and at full burn, a lamp will consume that in about 4 hours. So Thomas will need to refill them once during the night, probably around midnight. He trims each wick with small scissors, cutting away the charred portion, making sure the edge is even all around. An uneven wick creates an uneven flame, and that reduces the light output. He's very particular about this. Each wick must be perfect. Then he adjusts the height of each wick, turning the little knobs that raise or lower them. Not too high, which wastes oil and creates smoke. Not too low, which gives insufficient light. Just right, which is something you learn through experience. Thomas has done this hundreds of times. His fingers know the correct position. He checks each reflector one more time, making sure they're properly positioned. The angle is critical. Too high or too low, and the light beam goes to the wrong place. He makes tiny adjustments, sighting along the reflector surface, making sure everything is aligned. Then, as the last light fades from the sky, he lights the lamps, one by one, using a taper, touching flame to wick. Each lamp catches, the flame growing from a small flicker to a steady burn. 8 lamps, 8 flames. The reflectors gather the light and send it outward, across the darkening water. Thomas stands in the centre of the lantern room, surrounded by light and warmth from the burning lamps. Outside, it's nearly dark now. Inside, the lamps create a bubble of brightness. He checks the mechanism one more time, then winds it. The weight rises on its chain, clanking softly. This will keep the light turning for the next 8 hours. With the lamps lit and everything in order, Thomas descends to the middle room. He's hungry again. Physical labour all day makes a man hungry. He makes his supper: salt pork, thick slices cut from the barrel, boiled with some turnips that are starting to get soft but still edible. Simple food, but filling. He eats at his table, looking out at the darkness. Through the cracks around the trapdoor to the lantern room above, he can see the glow of the lamps, a warm yellow light that pulses slightly as the mechanism turns. Flash, dark, flash, dark. The rhythm of the lighthouse. After supper, Thomas washes his dishes in a basin, dries them carefully, puts them away. Then he sits for a while with one of his books. Tonight, he chooses poetry. He's not an educated man, didn't have much schooling, but he can read, and he's come to appreciate poetry. The way words can be put together to create something more than their simple meaning. He reads by the light of a single candle, the words washing over him. Some of them he doesn't fully understand, but he likes the sound of them, the rhythm. It's like the rhythm of the sea, he thinks. Words rising and falling like waves. Around 8 o'clock, he does his first evening check. Climbs the stairs, inspects the lamps. All burning well. The wicks haven't grown uneven, the oil levels are still adequate. The mechanism turns smoothly. He looks out at the darkness. There are lights out there, 2 ships that he can see. One fairly close, moving south. Another far out, barely visible. He watches them for a few minutes, then descends. At 10 o'clock, another check. Same routine, everything is well. The night is cold and clear now. The clouds have broken up, and through the gaps he can see stars, bright and sharp in the winter sky. At midnight, he'll need to refill the lamps and wind the mechanism again, but for now, he allows himself to rest. He sits in his room, wrapped in a blanket, and simply exists, listening to the wind, the sound of the sea, the tick of his pocket watch, the small sounds of the tower settling. This is his life. This is what he chose, or what chose him. And sitting here in the darkness, waiting for midnight, Thomas finds that he's content, not happy, exactly. Happiness requires something more, some spark of joy. But content, at peace, with his work, his solitude, his purpose. The light above him turns and turns, casting its beams across the water, and somewhere out there, a ship's captain sees the flash, counts the interval, recognizes Street Catherine's light, adjusts his course accordingly, passes safely by the rocks that have claimed so many vessels over the centuries. And that, Thomas thinks, is enough. That's purpose enough for any life. February arrives with ice and wind. Thomas wakes one morning to find the world transformed. During the night, spray from the waves has frozen on everything. The rocks below the tower are coated in ice. The path to the well is treacherous. And worst of all, the outside of the lantern room glass is covered in a thick layer of ice, enough to seriously dim the light. This is a problem that must be addressed immediately. Ships rely on the strength and clarity of the light. A dimmed light might not be visible at the distances where it's most needed. Thomas eats a quick breakfast of cold porridge and prepares himself for what will be difficult, dangerous work. He gathers his tools. A wooden scraper, carefully shaped to fit against the curved glass panes without scratching them. A bucket of sand, which can be used to provide traction on the icy gallery walkway. Heavy rope, which he'll tie around his waist as a safety line. The climb to the lantern room seems longer this morning. Thomas is not looking forward to what comes next. The gallery in winter is dangerous at the best of times. With ice, it becomes truly hazardous. He opens the door to the gallery, and the cold hits him like a physical blow. The wind is fierce, coming from the northeast, carrying more spray, more moisture to freeze on every surface. The iron railing is covered in ice, smooth and treacherous. The narrow walkway is slick. Thomas ties the rope around his waist, secures the other end to a sturdy iron bracket inside the lantern room. This way, if he slips, he won't fall to the rocks below. He'll swing against the tower wall, which will hurt, but won't kill him, probably. He spreads sand on the walkway in front of where he'll be working. This gives his boots something to grip. Then, moving very carefully, keeping his body weight low and his center of gravity close to the wall, he begins to scrape ice from the glass. The ice is thick, perhaps a quarter-inch in some places. It doesn't want to come off. Thomas has to work at it, scraping firmly but not so hard that he might break the glass. The wind fights him, trying to push him off balance. His hands, even in thick gloves, begin to ache with cold almost immediately. He works on one pane at a time. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Ice falls away in sheets, dropping to the rocks below. His breath comes in clouds. His nose runs in the cold, and he has to stop frequently to wipe it with the back of his glove. The first pane takes 10 minutes. He has 24 panes to do. Thomas does the math in his head. 4 hours of work, minimum. Maybe more if the ice gets thicker, or if he has to stop to warm his hands. He continues. Second pane, third pane. The rhythm of the scraper against the glass becomes almost meditative, despite the cold and the danger. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Ice falling. Wind howling. The sea crashing against the rocks below. His fingers lose feeling after the first hour. They've gone numb, which is both a blessing and a curse. A blessing because they no longer hurt. A curse because he can't feel the scraper properly, can't gauge how much pressure he's applying. He has to watch his hands carefully, making sure the scraper stays at the right angle. After 2 hours, he's halfway done. 12 panes cleared. 12 to go. He goes inside for a few minutes to warm his hands. holds them over one of the lamps, feeling the warmth radiating from the flame. The return of feeling is painful, pins and needles that gradually give way to throbbing. He flexes his fingers, making sure they still work properly. Back outside. The wind hasn't diminished. If anything, it's stronger. More spray coming over the rocks. Thomas watches the water for a moment. The waves are huge. Dark mountains topped with white foam. They crash against the base of the tower with enough force that he can feel the vibration through the stone. This is storm weather. It will get worse before it gets better. But at least the ice will be cleared before the worst of it hits. He returns to his work. Pane 13, 14, 15. His arms ache now from the repetitive motion. His back hurts from bending. His knees hurt from bracing against the wind. But he continues. This is the work. This is what must be done. Around midday, he finishes. All 24 panes cleared. The glass gleams clean, transparent. The light will shine through clearly tonight. Thomas gathers his tools, goes back inside, closes the door behind him. The relief is immediate. Out of the wind, out of the danger, done. He goes down to the middle room, builds up his fire, makes hot tea, sits at his table with the cup wrapped in his hands, feeling the warmth seep into his bones. Outside, the storm is building. The wind speed increases through the afternoon. By evening, it's a full gale. This is when Thomas's experience becomes critical. He knows what to expect in a storm, knows what can go wrong, knows how to prepare. He brings extra oil up to the lantern room. If the storm gets bad enough, he might not want to make the trip down to get more. Better to have it ready. He also brings extra lamp wicks, tools for trimming, cleaning rags, everything he might need. He checks all the shutters on the lower floors, makes sure they're latched securely. A shutter torn off by the wind could break a window, and a broken window in a storm means water and cold air flooding into the tower. He prepares food that can be eaten cold if necessary. If the storm knocks out his stove's chimney, he won't be able to cook until it's repaired. Bread, cheese, some of the salt pork that doesn't need cooking. He sets these aside, wrapped in cloth. Then he settles in to wait. The storm hits around sunset. The wind becomes a constant roar, loud enough that Thomas has to shout to hear his own voice. Not that there's anyone to shout to. He's alone, as always. The rain comes horizontal, driven by the wind. It hammers against the windows like thrown gravel. The whole tower shakes. Not a lot, just a slight trembling, but enough to notice. Thomas knows the tower is solid, built to withstand this and worse, but it's still unsettling to feel the stone moving beneath his feet. He lights the lamps as usual at dusk. This is more critical than ever in storm weather. Ships will be struggling out there, fighting to stay off the rocks. They need the light to navigate by. As darkness falls, Thomas can see lights through the storm, ships' lanterns, dim and distant, moving erratically. One ship is quite close to shore, too close. Thomas watches it with growing concern. The ship is clearly in trouble. It's trying to claw its way offshore, away from the rocks, but the wind is pushing it steadily landward. Thomas can see the ship's lights rising and falling as it plows through the huge waves. Sometimes the lights disappear completely as the ship drops into a trough. Then they reappear as it rises on the next wave. There's nothing Thomas can do to help. He has no boat, no way to communicate with the ship, no way to warn them beyond keeping his light burning bright. All he can do is watch. For an hour, he watches. The ship makes agonizingly slow progress, tacking back and forth, trying to gain distance from the shore. The wind fights it every foot of the way. Then, gradually, Thomas sees the ship begin to pull away. Slowly, slowly, it's making headway, moving offshore, moving to safety. He watches until the lights are far enough out that he's sure the ship is safe. Then he allows himself to breathe normally again. But there are other ships out there. Through the night, Thomas sees lights appearing and disappearing, some far offshore, hopefully safe, some closer, fighting their own battles with the storm. He does his checks every hour during the storm, instead of his usual 2-hour interval. Every hour, up the stairs, inspect the lamps, make sure everything is functioning. The wind tries to find its way into the lantern room through every crack. It whistles and moans around the windows. The lamps flicker but don't go out, protected by the glass. The mechanism continues to turn, though Thomas can hear it labouring against the vibration of the tower. Around midnight, one of the lamps goes out. The wick has burned down too far, or perhaps it's been extinguished by a downdraft. Thomas retracts it, relights it, adjusts it carefully, checks the other lamps. One of them is burning too high, creating too much smoke. He lowers it slightly. Everything must be perfect. The storm continues through the night. Thomas makes his hourly rounds, up and down the stairs. His legs ache from all the climbing, his eyes burn from lack of sleep and from staring into the darkness, watching for ships in distress. Dawn comes slowly, grey light barely distinguishable from the darkness. The wind is still fierce but beginning to diminish. The rain has stopped. Thomas can see the destruction the storm has left. The path to the well is littered with debris. Broken branches from the gorse bushes, stones torn loose from the hillside, seaweed thrown up from the beach below, lying in dark tangles. But the tower is intact. The light burned through the storm. Thomas allows himself to feel satisfaction at this. The work was done, the duty was fulfilled. He extinguishes the lamps, begins his morning routine. Today, the routine is harder. He's exhausted from the night of watching. His body aches, but the work must still be done. The reflectors must be polished. The glass must be cleaned. The log must be updated. He writes carefully. February 15th, 1784. Severe storm during night. Northeast wind, estimated 50 miles per hour or greater. Heavy rain until midnight. Multiple ships sighted in distress. All appeared to reach safety. One ship came dangerously close to shore around 8 p.m. but managed to claw offshore. All lamps functioned throughout night, despite one temporary extinguishment at midnight, immediately relit. No damage to Lighthouse or equipment. After updating the log, Thomas allows himself to sleep. Not his usual sleep, but a deep, exhausted sleep, still partly dressed, on top of his blankets. He sleeps for 4 hours, wakes feeling somewhat better, makes tea, eats, then goes out to inspect the damage. The path to the well is passable, but will need work to clear it properly. The well itself is fine, as solid as the day it was built. Thomas draws water, hauls it back to the tower. The work helps wake him fully, gets his blood moving again. In the afternoon, he walks down to the shore to see if there's any wreckage from the storm. This is part of his unofficial duties. If a ship was lost, there might be survivors. There might be cargo that should be salvaged. There might be bodies that should be recovered and buried properly. Today, he finds only minor debris, pieces of broken wood that might have come from a ship or might have come from anywhere. Rope, tangled and salt-crusted. A wooden bucket, staved in. Nothing that tells a clear story. Hopefully, that means no ships were lost. Hopefully, all the lights he saw made it safely through. The storms continue through late February and into March. Not every day, but often enough. Thomas falls into a rhythm. Storm coming, prepare. Storm here. Watch and maintain the light. Storm past. Recover and repair. Then do it all again. Each storm is slightly different. Some bring more wind, some more rain. Some come from the northeast, cold and fierce. Some from the southwest, warmer but with huge seas. Thomas learns to read the subtle signs, the way the clouds build, the colour of the water, the behaviour of the birds, which flee inland before the worst weather arrives. He sees many ships in distress. Most make it through. Some he's not sure about. Lights that disappear and don't reappear. Could mean the ship sank. Could mean it just passed beyond the horizon. There's no way to know for certain. In early March, a ship does wreck on the rocks below the lighthouse. Thomas sees it happen. The ship is a coastal trader, trying to round the headland in deteriorating weather. Misjudges the current, gets pushed too close to shore, strikes the rocks. Thomas hears the impact even over the wind and waves, a grinding, tearing sound, wood breaking. He sees the ship's lights lurch, tilt. The ship is stuck on the rocks, being pounded by the waves. He grabs a lantern, runs down the path to the shore. It's dangerous in the darkness, but he has to see if anyone survived. The path is steep and rocky. He slips once, catches himself, continues down. At the shore, he can see the ship more clearly. It's badly damaged, the hull breached. Waves are washing over the deck, but there are men. He can see them moving. They're trying to abandon ship to get to shore. Thomas wades into the water up to his knees, holding his lantern high. "Here!" he shouts. "This way!" The wind tears the words from his mouth, but some of the sailors see the light. They make for it. The first man reaches Thomas, grabbed by the current and the waves, struggling. Thomas reaches out, grabs the man's arm, hauls him into shallower water. The man collapses on the beach, coughing up seawater. "Others?" Thomas shouts. The man nods, too exhausted to speak. Points back at the ship. Thomas wades in again. 3 more men make it to shore. Thomas helps each one, drags them above the high tide line. Then, no more come. He waits, holding his lantern high, but the ship is breaking up now, waves tearing it apart. If there were others, they're gone. He gets the survivors up to the lighthouse. 4 men, all of them soaked, exhausted, some injured. Thomas gets them into the ground floor of the tower, out of the wind, builds up the fire in the middle room until it's roaring, finds dry clothes for them, blankets, makes hot tea. The men huddle around the fire, shaking with cold and shock. One has a gash on his head. Thomas washes it with clean water, bandages it as best he can. He's no physician, but he knows basic first aid. "How many were aboard?" he asks. 7, one of the men says. His voice is hoarse. "Captain went down with the ship. 2 others didn't make it off. 3 men lost." Thomas feels the weight of it. The light had been burning. The ship should have seen it, should have stayed further offshore. But sometimes ships make mistakes. Sometimes the sea wins despite everything. The survivors stay at the lighthouse for 2 days, until the weather clears enough for them to walk to the nearest village, 5 miles down the coast. Thomas feeds them from his stores, gives them what comfort he can. They're grateful, effusive in their thanks. He waves it off. It's what anyone would do. After they leave, Thomas returns to his routines, but he thinks about those 3 lost men, wonders if they had families, wonders if anyone will tell their families what happened, wonders if his light might have been brighter, might have been more visible, might have prevented the wreck. But he knows this kind of thinking leads nowhere good. He did his job. The light was burning. The ship wrecked anyway. These things happen at sea, have happened since men first took boats onto the water. will continue to happen. All he can do is keep the light burning, every night, every storm. That's his duty, that's his purpose. March ends with the equinox, equal day and equal night. After this, the days will be longer than the nights. Spring is coming. Thomas notes it in his log, allows himself to feel a small measure of hope. The worst of the winter storms are past. Gentler weather is ahead. April arrives with a softness to the air that's been absent since October. Thomas wakes one morning to find the frost gone from his window. The wind, when he steps outside, has lost its bitter edge. There's warmth in the sun, finally. Pale warmth, tentative, but real. The change in seasons brings a change in Thomas's work. Winter is about survival, about maintaining the light through the harshest conditions. Spring is about renewal, about repairs and preparation for the year ahead. He begins with the tower's exterior. The winter storms have taken their toll. Paint has been scoured off by wind-driven salt spray. Mortar between some of the stones has crumbled. The iron railing on the gallery shows rust in several places despite being painted just last year. Thomas starts with the railing. This is important work. The railing is all that stands between him and a 60-foot fall when he's working on the gallery. It must be solid, must be maintained. He has paint in his stores. Black paint, tar-based, thick and durable. He also has wire brushes for removing rust, sandpaper for smoothing rough spots, and rags for applying the paint. The work begins with preparation. Thomas goes out onto the gallery on a calm day with his wire brush. He scrubs at the rust spots, removing the orange-brown corrosion down to clean metal. This is tedious work. The rust doesn't want to come off. He scrubs and scrubs, his arm moving in repetitive circles, until finally the metal gleams silver grey beneath. He works his way around the gallery over the course of several days. Each section of railing gets the same treatment: rust removed, surface sanded smooth. Then, on a day when the weather is dry and calm, he paints. The paint goes on thick and black. Thomas uses a brush, carefully working the paint into every crevice, every joint. The smell of the tar paint is strong, chemical. It makes his head ache if he breathes too much of it. He works in sections, painting a few feet at a time, then going inside to let the fumes dissipate from his head. The fresh paint gleams wetly in the Sunday black and glossy, beautiful in its way. Thomas feels satisfaction looking at it. This will protect the iron through another year of salt spray and storms. Next, he addresses the mortar. There are several places where the mortar between the stones has crumbled, leaving gaps. Water can get into these gaps, freeze in winter, and crack the stones. Better to fix it now. Thomas makes mortar from lime and sand, mixing it with water to the right consistency, not too wet, not too dry. The consistency of thick porridge. He uses a trowel to pack the mortar into the gaps, working it in firmly, smoothing the surface. This is skilled work. His father was a mason, taught Thomas the basics before Thomas went to sea as a young man. Those skills come back now. The way to hold the trowel, the way to apply the mortar so it bonds properly, the way to strike it smooth. He works on the mortar repairs over the course of a week, finding gaps, filling them, moving on to the next. Some are small, just hairline cracks. Others are larger, gaps an inch wide where the weather has eaten away the old mortar. All of them get the same careful attention. While the mortar cures, Thomas turns his attention to other maintenance. The windows all need their putty checked. Putty dries out over time, cracks and falls away, leaving gaps where water can seep in. He goes around each window with fresh putty, a putty knife, and patient hands. Removing old putty, cleaning the rabbit, applying new putty, smoothing it. This is fiddly work, but important. The door to the tower gets a fresh coat of paint. Red, traditional for lighthouses. The old paint has faded and chipped. Thomas sands the door smooth, wipes away the dust, then applies new paint. 2 coats. The red is bright and cheerful against the grey stone. It makes the tower look cared for, inhabited, alive. In late April, Thomas begins his garden. This is work he looks forward to, different from the endless maintenance of the lighthouse. This is creation, growth, life. The garden plot is a patch of ground about 20 feet on each side, somewhat sheltered from the wind by a curve in the rocks. The soil is poor, rocky, thin, but Thomas has been improving it. Each year he adds what organic matter he can find. Seaweed from the beach, which he hauls up and digs into the soil. Ash from his stove. His own waste, composted for a year, until it's broken down into something the plants can use. He works the soil with a spade, turning it over, breaking up clumps, removing rocks. This is hard physical labour. The spade bites into the earth, lifts, turns, again and again. His back aches, his hands blister despite his gloves, but slowly the soil becomes workable, loose, ready to receive seeds. Thomas has seeds saved from last year, potatoes, which he kept in the cool darkness through the winter. He cuts them into pieces, making sure each piece has at least one eye, one sprouting point. These he plants in rows, spacing them carefully, a foot apart in rows, 2 feet apart. He covers them with soil, pats it down gently. Onions next. He has onion sets, small bulbs barely bigger than his thumbnail. These go into the ground with just their tops showing. They'll grow through the spring and summer, becoming full-sized onions by fall. He plants herbs. Parsley, sage, thyme, rosemary. These are useful in cooking, and they grow well in this climate. He plants them along the edge of the garden where they'll get good sun and drainage. Finally, he tries something new this year. Beans. He's never grown beans before, doesn't know if they'll tolerate the wind and salt air. But it's worth trying. He plants them along a small trellis he's built from driftwood, hoping they'll climb and produce. After planting, he waters everything thoroughly with water carried from the well. This is many trips back and forth, heavy buckets sloshing, but the plants need water to germinate, to grow. Thomas doesn't mind the work. Over the following weeks, he tends the garden daily, watering when the rain doesn't come, pulling weeds, watching for slugs and snails that want to eat his seedlings. The garden becomes part of his routine. Morning check of the lamps, then down to tend the garden. Evening check, then a last look at the garden before lighting the lamps. The first green shoots appear in early May. Potato plants pushing up through the soil, onion tops lengthening, the herbs sending up fresh growth. Thomas feels disproportionate joy at these small signs of life. Things growing, thriving, because of his care. May brings longer days. The sun rises earlier, sets later. Thomas needs the lamps for fewer hours each night. This means less oil consumed, which is good for his stores. It also means more daylight hours for work and for simply being outside, enjoying the warming weather. The seabirds return to nest. Gulls and terns and kittiwakes, hundreds of them, filling the air with their cries. They nest on the rocky ledges below the tower, using seaweed and grass and whatever else they can find to build their nests. Thomas watches them with interest. The birds are loud, especially in the morning and evening when they're most active. Their cries echo off the tower. Some people might find it annoying, but Thomas enjoys it. After the relative quiet of winter, the noise is welcome. It's life, movement, activity. He watches the birds court and mate, watches them build their nests, watches them lay eggs, and then sit on them, patient and devoted, the cycle of life playing out on the rocks below his tower. Sometimes he walks down to the shore and watches the birds fish. They're magnificent flyers. They hover on the wind, spotting fish in the water below. Then they fold their wings and plunge, hitting the water with a splash, emerging with fish in their beaks. They make it look effortless, though Thomas knows it's not. It's skill developed over generations, instinct refined by necessity. The supply boat comes regularly now that the spring weather has settled in. James and Robert make their monthly run, bringing oil and coal and food. They also bring news from the town: who married, who died, who had babies, who bought a new fishing boat. Thomas listens to all of it, grateful for the connection to the wider world. Heard about the new lighthouse they're building up at Tynemouth. James mentions one day, as they're unloading oil jars, going to have one of those new Fresnel lenses, supposed to be much brighter than reflectors. Thomas nods. He's heard of Fresnel lenses, but has never seen one. They use shaped glass to focus the light instead of silvered reflectors. Supposedly much more efficient. Won't be long before they're putting them in all the lights, he says. Aye, James agrees. Though I expect your reflectors will last a good while yet. They're not going to replace everything overnight. This is probably true. The Trinity House authorities are careful with money. They'll upgrade the most important lights first, the ones at major harbours and dangerous headlands. A minor light like Street, Catherine's might wait years or even decades for a new lens. After the boat leaves, Thomas hauls the supplies up to the tower. Heavy work, but familiar. He stores everything carefully, updates his inventory, makes a note of what he'll need next month. In June, his garden really begins to flourish. The potato plants are knee-high, their leaves dark green and healthy. The onions are growing well. The herbs are bushy, ready to be harvested. And the beans, to his delight, are climbing their trellis. Small white flowers appear on the bean plants. These will become beans, he knows. Food for later in the summer. He harvests his first herbs in mid-June. Just a cutting, not too much, leaving plenty for the plants to continue growing, but enough to add to his evening meal. Fresh parsley, chopped fine, added to boiled potatoes. The taste is extraordinary after months of eating from his stores. Bright, green, alive. He savours every bite. The summer solstice arrives on June 21st, the longest day of the year. Thomas marks it in his log, as he always does. The sun doesn't set until after 9 o'clock in the evening. The twilight lasts until nearly 10. Thomas lights the lamps later than he has since last summer, grateful for the extra daylight hours. He uses the long evenings to work on his chess set. This is a project he started last winter and has been working on slowly ever since. He has a piece of oak, salvaged from a wreck, good wood that's been weathered by the sea but remains sound. He's carving it into chess pieces. This is patient, meditative work. He sits outside on calm evenings, the low sun warm on his face, and carves. Uses a small sharp knife to shape the wood. Kings and queens with crowns, bishops with mitres, knights as horse heads, rooks as castles, pawns as simple figures. The work goes slowly. A piece might take several evenings to complete, but Thomas doesn't mind. The process is the point, not the destination. The feel of the knife cutting through the wood, the smell of fresh oak shavings, the piece slowly emerging from the rough block. He has most of the pieces done now. 2 kings, 2 queens, 4 bishops, 4 knights, 4 rooks. He's working on the pawns, which are simpler but still require care. Each one must be similar to the others, but doesn't need the detail of the major pieces. On Midsummer Night, Thomas stays awake to watch the sunset. The sky turns gold, then orange, then red, as the sun sinks toward the horizon. The sea becomes a mirror of fire. The beauty of it is almost painful. Thomas stands on the gallery, watching, absorbing this moment. The sun finally touches the horizon, flattens, slides below. The sky remains bright for a long time afterward, purple, then blue, then slowly darkening. Stars begin to appear, the brightest ones first, then fainter ones as true darkness falls. Around 10:30, Thomas lights the lamps. The beam sweeps out across the summer sea. The water is almost calm tonight, just a gentle swell. The light reflects off the smooth surface, creating patterns of brightness and shadow that ripple and flow. Thomas watches for a while, then descends to his room. Even on the shortest night of the year, there are still checks to be made every 2 hours. The work doesn't change with the seasons. Only the hours of darkness change. The vigilance remains constant. As he settles into his bed, Thomas thinks about the year so far. Half done now. 6 months of light kept burning, 6 months of duty fulfilled, and ahead 6 more months. Through summer and fall and back into winter, the cycle continuing, the light turning, the watch kept. It's a good life, he thinks. Simple, hard sometimes, lonely often, but good, purposeful. There's something deeply satisfying about having a clear purpose, about knowing exactly what you need to do each day, about doing it well. He sleeps, and the light continues its rotation above him, turning, shining, guiding ships safely past the rocks, doing exactly what it was built to do, like Thomas himself, fulfilling its purpose. And that, he thinks in the moment before sleep takes him, is enough. July arrives with warmth and abundance. For Thomas, this is the easiest time of year at the Lighthouse. The weather is generally calm, the seas moderate, the work less desperate than in winter. This is when he can truly enjoy the solitude rather than simply enduring it. His garden has become a source of both food and pride. The potato plants are flowering, small white and purple blooms that eventually wither and fall off. Underground, Thomas knows, the tubers are growing. He's tempted to dig up just one plant to see, but he resists. Better to wait. Let them grow as large as possible. The bean plants are heavy with pods, long green pods hanging from the vines. Thomas picks the first beans in early July, fills a small basket with them. Back in the tower, he strings them, removes the tough fibers along their edges, boils them simply in salted water. They're sweet and tender, nothing like the dried beans from his stores. He eats them slowly, savouring each bite. The onions are doing well too, their tops thick and green. He pulls one to test it. The bulb is already the size of his fist, white and pungent. He slices it thin, adds it to his evening meal. The sharp sweetness of fresh onion is a revelation after months of eating dried or pickled vegetables. The herbs are prolific. He harvests them regularly now, hanging bunches to dry in the middle room. Sage and thyme and rosemary, their scents filling the air. He uses them fresh in cooking and saves the dried herbs for winter. Next February, when the garden is buried in frost, he'll be grateful for these dried herbs, this captured summer. In mid-July, Thomas begins harvesting the early potatoes. He digs carefully around one plant, feeling in the soil for the tubers, pulls out 5 good-sized potatoes, each one perfect. Smooth tan skin, firm flesh. He rinses them in water, boils them with their skins on, eats them with a bit of the precious butter he got from the last supply boat. They're earthy and sweet and filling. Perfect. Over the next week, he harvests half his potato crop, digs each plant carefully, collecting the potatoes, laying them out to dry in the sun before storing them. The yield is good this year, better than last year. The soil is improving with each season of amendments and care. The potatoes go into storage in the coolest, darkest corner of the ground floor, laid out in shallow wooden boxes, not touching each other, where air can circulate around them. If stored properly, they'll last well into winter. If stored improperly, they'll rot, and he'll lose them. Thomas is careful, very careful. The longer days mean less oil consumption for the lamps. Thomas's stores are in good shape. The supply boat brings fresh stocks monthly, but he's using less than he's receiving. This is good. It means he has a buffer for winter when consumption increases and deliveries become less reliable. The summer also brings more ship traffic. The coastal waters are busy with fishing boats, traders, naval vessels. Thomas sees dozens of ships each week. Some come quite close to shore. Some stay far out, just visible on the horizon. He identifies them by their sails, their shape, the way they move through the water. He's become skilled at this over the years. That's a 3-masted bark, probably a merchant ship. That's a naval frigate, you can tell by the gun ports and the precise way it's sailed. That's a fishing boat, low in the water, probably full of catch heading back to port. Each ship tells a story if you know how to read it. On calm evenings, Thomas sometimes sits outside and simply watches the sea, the sun lowering toward the horizon, the water taking on colours, blue, green, gold, purple, the play of light on the waves. It's beautiful in a way that never gets old. He's seen thousands of sunsets from this tower, but each one is unique, each one worthy of attention. Sometimes he thinks about Mary during these quiet moments, remembers sitting with her on summer evenings when he was home from sea, before he became a lighthouse keeper, when he was a sailor, coming home between voyages. They would sit together, not always talking, sometimes just existing in each other's presence. That was enough. She would have liked it here, he thinks. The peace, the rhythm of the days. She was never one for crowds and noise. She liked quiet, liked routine. They would have been good companions here. But she's gone, and he's alone. He's made his peace with that. Most days it doesn't hurt. Some days it does, sharply, unexpectedly. Those days he works harder, keeps busy, doesn't allow himself time to dwell. The grief hasn't gone away, but he's learned to carry it, like a stone in his pocket, always there, but not always noticed. August brings occasional storms. Even in summer, Thomas watches one build on a late afternoon. The sky to the east darkens, becomes a deep purple grey. The wind shifts, coming from a different direction. The birds go quiet, then flee inland. All the signs of a storm approaching. He prepares as always, checks the shutters, brings extra oil to the lantern room, makes sure everything is secured. Then he waits. The storm arrives around sunset, just as he's lighting the lamps. This is a summer storm, different from winter tempests. The wind is strong but not as cold. The rain is heavy but warm. Thunder rolls across the water, and lightning flashes, illuminating the waves in stark white light. Thomas stands in the lantern room, watching. The lightning is spectacular. Great branching forks of electricity reaching from cloud to sea. Each flash turns night into day for an instant, freezing the waves in position. Then darkness again, and the afterimage burned into his vision. The thunder is loud enough to shake the tower, or maybe it's the wind, hard to tell. The rain hammers against the glass in waves, sometimes so hard that Thomas can barely see out. But the lamps burn steadily, protected by the thick glass, and the mechanism keeps turning. He sees several ships out there, struggling with the storm. One is quite close to shore, too close. Thomas watches it intently, willing it to turn, to get offshore. For an hour, he watches. The ship is labouring, sails reefed tight, trying to claw away from the rock. The lightning helps, in a way. Each flash shows Thomas where the ship is, how it's doing. Between flashes, he can see the ship's lanterns, rising and falling with the waves. The crew is fighting for their lives out there, fighting the wind and the current and the sea that wants to smash them against the rocks. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the ship makes progress. Tacking back and forth, gaining a few yards with each tack. Moving offshore, moving to safety. Finally, Thomas sees it clear the headland, moving into deeper water where there's room to ride out the storm. He breathes a sigh of relief. The storm passes before midnight. The rain stops, the wind dies down, the clouds begin to break up. Stars appear through the gaps. Thomas does his midnight check and finds everything in order. The lamps have burned through the storm without problem. The clockwork mechanism has kept turning. All is as it should be. The next morning dawns clear and washed clean. The air has a crystalline quality, every detail sharp and distinct. Thomas can see for 30 miles or more. The hills inland are clearly visible. Individual trees discernible on the distant slopes. He walks down to the shore to check for storm damage. Finds some debris, pieces of broken wood, rope, a torn sail tangled in the rocks, but no sign of major wreckage. The ships he saw all made it through, it seems. The light did its job. In late August, Thomas receives a visitor, a man from Trinity House, the organisation that oversees lighthouses. This is unusual. The Trinity House men rarely come out to the small isolated lights. They're too busy with the major lighthouses at important harbours and headlands. But this man, Mr. Harrison, has been assigned to inspect all the lights in the region, make sure they're being maintained properly, check the keeper's logs, ensure that everything is in order. Thomas welcomes him, offers him tea. They sit in the middle room, and Mr. Harrison asks questions. How much oil does the light consume? Are the lamps functioning properly? Have there been any wrecks? Any unusual events? Thomas answers everything carefully, truthfully. Shows Mr. Harrison the log, 3 years of meticulous entries. Every night's weather, every ship sighted, every maintenance task performed. Mr. Harrison reads through it, nodding occasionally. Very thorough, he says. Some keepers are. Less diligent in their record keeping. They climb to the lantern room. Mr. Harrison inspects the lamps, the reflectors, the clockwork mechanism. He's clearly knowledgeable, asks technical questions. Thomas answers them, demonstrates how the mechanism works, explains his maintenance routines. Everything seems to be in excellent order, Mr. Harrison says. You run a good light here, Thomas. It's simple praise, but Thomas feels a glow of pride. His work acknowledged, his diligence recognized. It matters, even though he tells himself it shouldn't, even though he does the work for its own sake, not for recognition. Mr. Harrison stays for a meal, then leaves on the supply boat that brought him. After he's gone, Thomas returns to his routines. But he thinks about the visit, about the fact that somewhere, in some office in London, there are men who care about his work, who rely on him to keep the light burning. He's part of something larger than himself, part of a network of lights around the coast, all of them working together to keep ships safe. September brings the first signs of autumn. The light changes, becomes more golden. The angle of the sun shifts. lower in the sky. The days are still warm, but the nights are cooling. Thomas notices it in the mornings, the chill in the air when he wakes. The seabirds begin to leave. The nesting season is over, the young fledged. The birds gather in flocks, hundreds of them wheeling and crying over the water. Then, one morning, they're gone, heading south to wherever they spend the winter. The rocks below the lighthouse are suddenly quiet, empty of their clamour. Thomas harvests the last of his garden. The remaining potatoes, dozens of them, the final beans, the onions, which he pulls and braids together by their tops, hangs to cure in the tower. He digs the herb plants, hangs them to dry. The garden plot looks bare now, emptied of its bounty. But Thomas's stores are full. He has more food than he started the year with, potatoes and onions and beans, all grown by his own hands. Dried herbs to flavour his meals through the winter. He's proud of this. Proud of what he's accomplished. The equinox arrives on September 22nd, day and night of equal length. After this, the nights will be longer than the days. Darkness will begin to dominate again. Thomas notes it in his log, feels the year turning. The weather is changeable now. Calm one day, stormy the next. The autumn pattern beginning. Thomas watches the barometer carefully, tries to predict what's coming. Sometimes he's right. Sometimes the weather surprises him. He receives a letter from his sister in the September supply run. She writes that she's planning to visit in the spring, if the weather permits. She wants to see how he lives, wants to see the lighthouse. Thomas reads this with mixed feelings. Part of him would enjoy the company, the chance to show her his work. Part of him is protective of his solitude, unsure how he'd manage with a visitor. But spring is months away. No point worrying about it now. He writes back, tells her she's welcome, leaves it at that. The days grow shorter, the nights grow longer. Thomas lights the lamps earlier each evening, burns through more oil, uses more candles for his own light in the evening hours. The cycle is turning, moving back toward winter. But he's prepared. His stores are full. His tower is maintained. His mind is ready for the long darkness ahead. This is the 4th year he's done this. The 4th time he's watched the seasons turn from this tower. He knows what's coming. He knows he can handle it. And so September ends and October begins. And the wheel of the year continues its ancient turn. The light keeps burning. The watch is kept. Thomas does his duty, night after night, as the darkness slowly reclaims the world. October arrives with a certain inevitability, the warmth of summer fading like a dream, the cold reality of approaching winter asserting itself in the chill mornings, the early darkness, the changing character of the wind. Thomas knows this pattern, has lived through it 3 times before at Street Catherine's Light, and many times before that in his life. The year turning toward its close, the darkness returning, there's a melancholy to it, but also a certain comfort. The familiar cycle, the expected progression, time moving as it always has, as it always will. He spends October preparing. This is critical work. Mistakes made now, shortcuts taken now, will have consequences in the depths of winter. So Thomas is thorough, methodical, leaving nothing to chance. He inspects every part of the tower from top to bottom. Starting at the lantern room, he examines the glass panes for any cracks that might have developed over the summer. Even a small crack can worsen in winter when water gets in and freezes. He finds 2 small cracks, marks them. These panes will need to be replaced before the worst weather arrives. He checks the putty around each pane, the caulking around the door frame, the seals around the ventilation openings, every place where air might get in or water might seep through. He makes notes of what needs attention. The clockwork mechanism gets a thorough inspection. Thomas disassembles it as far as he dares, cleans each gear, each pinion, looks for worn spots, places where metal has been rubbing metal, finds a few, applies oil sparingly, not too much. Too much oil attracts dust, just enough to lubricate, to reduce friction. He tests the mechanism, listening to it run. There's a certain sound it makes when everything is right, a smooth, regular ticking. When something is wrong, the sound changes, a catching, a grinding, an irregular rhythm. Thomas knows this sound intimately. Today it sounds right, good. The lamps get individual attention, each one cleaned thoroughly, the brass polished, the glass chimneys inspected for cracks or chips, the wick mechanisms tested to ensure they raise and lower smoothly. Thomas replaces 2 wicks that have become too short, too charred, sets the old wicks aside. They can still be used in emergency, but new wicks are better. The reflectors receive the most attention. These are the heart of the light's effectiveness. Thomas removes each one from its mount, carries it down to the middle room where the light is better, examines the silvered surface minutely, looking for tarnish, for scratches, for any deterioration. He finds that one reflector has a small area where the silvering has worn away, exposing the copper beneath. This will reduce the reflector's effectiveness. There's nothing Thomas can do about it himself. Resilvering requires specialized equipment and skills he doesn't have. He makes a note in his log. This reflector will need to be replaced or resilvered by Trinity House, but it will still function in the meantime. He polishes each reflector until it gleams, until he can see his face reflected in it clearly, sets them aside carefully, wrapped in cloth to protect them until he reinstalls them. The stairs get inspected, 73 stone steps, climbed dozens of times each day, each step examined for cracks, for wear, for loose spots. Thomas finds one step where the edge has begun to crumble. He mixes mortar, repairs it carefully. Can't have a dangerous step, not when he's climbing in the dark, tired, focused on other things. The windows throughout the tower get attention, each one checked, cleaned, putty replaced where needed, the shutters tested, hinges oiled, latches tightened. These shutters must work properly. In a winter storm, a broken shutter could mean a broken window, and that could mean disaster. The stove gets cleaned thoroughly. Thomas removes the stovepipe, takes it outside, beats on it to dislodge accumulated soot, checks the chimney for blockages. A blocked chimney can fill the room with smoke, or worse, with carbon monoxide, silent, deadly. Thomas is very careful about this. He cleans the inside of the stove, removing ash and clinker, checks the firebox for cracks, tests the door seal. Everything must be right. This stove is his only source of heat for cooking and warmth through the winter. His stores get inventoried carefully. Thomas counts everything, every sack of flour, every jar of oil, every pound of salt pork, calculates consumption rates, figures out what he'll need to get through to spring, makes detailed lists for the supply boat. He discovers he's low on flour. The summer baking used more than he expected. He adds extra flour to his supply order. Better to have too much than too little. Flour doesn't spoil if kept dry. His rope stores get inspected. Every lighthouse uses a lot of rope. For raising and lowering supplies, for safety lines, for securing things against the wind. Thomas checks each coil of rope for fraying, for rot, for weak spots, finds a few places where rope has deteriorated, marks those sections with yarn so he knows not to use them for anything critical. The well gets its annual cleaning. Thomas descends into it on a ladder, lowering himself into the cool darkness. At the bottom, he can see the water seeping in from the spring. He bails out the well as much as possible, then scrubs the stone walls, removes any algae or slime, clears out any debris that might have fallen in. This is unpleasant work. The well is cold and damp and claustrophobic, but it must be done. The water must stay clean. Thomas's health depends on it. He works quickly, efficiently, anxious to get out. Climbing back up, he feels the ache in his arms and shoulders. He's not as young as he once was. These physical tasks are getting harder. But he can still do them. Still has the strength and the will. That's what matters. In late October, the supply boat makes its final run before winter truly sets in. James and Robert know this might be the last time they can safely cross until February or March. So, they bring extra of everything. The boat is loaded heavily. Oil jars, coal sacks, flour, salt pork, dried beans, saltfish, candles, lamp wicks, rope, nails, tools. Everything Thomas might need to survive and keep the light burning through 4 months of winter. Thomas helps them unload. Heavy work. They make trip after trip up the path to the tower, carrying loads. The oil jars are the worst. Each one weighs perhaps 50 pounds when full. Thomas's back aches by the time they're all stored. James and Robert stay for tea before they leave. They sit in the middle room, drinking and talking. James tells a story about a storm they encountered last week. Robert talks about his daughter's wedding plans. Thomas listens, contributes occasionally, mostly just enjoys the company. "You take care this winter, Thomas," James says as they're leaving. "We'll try to come out in January if the weather allows, but can't promise anything." "I'll be fine," Thomas says, same as always. He watches their boat pull away from the dock, watches it grow smaller as they cross to the mainland. Then they're gone, and he's alone again. Alone with his light, his tower, his duty. For the next 4 months, probably. Maybe longer if the winter is harsh. Thomas doesn't mind. This is what he signed up for. This is his life. He goes back inside, climbs to the lantern room, looks out at the sea, grey and restless under the October sky. It's going to be a long winter. He can feel it. November comes with darkness and cold. The days are short now, the sun rising late and setting early. Thomas needs the lamps for 12, 13, 14 hours each night. His oil consumption increases accordingly. He settles into the winter routine. Wake early. Check the lamps from the night before. Extinguish them. Clean and prepare them for evening. Tend to maintenance tasks during the daylight hours. Light the lamps at dusk. Check them every 2 hours through the night. Sleep in fragments between checks. Repeat. The weather deteriorates. Storms come frequently, sometimes several in a week. Thomas prepares for each one, endures it, recovers, then prepares for the next. The wind howls around the tower. The rain beats against the windows. The waves crash against the rocks with enough force that sometimes spray reaches all the way to the lantern room, 60 feet up. He sees fewer ships now. The sensible ones have sought port for the winter. Only the desperate or the foolhardy are out in these conditions. Thomas keeps his light burning bright, knowing that someone might need it. One night in mid-November, during a particularly fierce storm, Thomas sees lights offshore. A ship, clearly in distress. It's not moving correctly. The lights are bobbing erratically, sometimes disappearing entirely as the ship drops into the troughs between waves. Thomas watches, helpless. There's nothing he can do, no way to help. All he can do is keep his light burning, hope the ship can see it, hope they can use it to navigate away from the rocks. For hours he watches. The ship seems to be drifting closer to shore, pushed by the wind and waves. Thomas can't tell if it's under control or if the crew has lost command of it. The storm is too fierce, the visibility too poor. Around midnight, the lights disappear. Thomas stares into the darkness, waiting for them to reappear. They don't. He scans the horizon, looks north and south along the coast. Nothing. The lights are gone. Thomas feels a cold certainty in his gut. The ship has foundered, gone down. How many men were aboard? 10, 20, 30, all of them probably dead now, drowned in the cold November sea. He stands in the lantern room for a long time, staring out at the darkness, hoping to see something. Survivors clinging to wreckage, a boat, anything. But the storm and the night show him nothing. When the storm clears the next morning, Thomas walks the shore, looking for wreckage, for bodies, for any sign of what happened. He finds pieces of wood that might be from a ship or might be from anything. Rope, a shattered barrel, a sailor's cap, soaked and torn. He can't be certain it's from the ship he saw, but he suspects it is. Somewhere out there, men died. Families will be waiting for ships that won't return, for men who won't come home. Thomas feels the weight of it. The light was burning. The ship was lost anyway. Sometimes the sea wins. He salvages what little he can. The rope might be useful once it dries, and he can assess its condition. The barrel is ruined, but the metal hoops can be reused. The cap he buries above the high tide line, with a simple prayer for the man who wore it. It's all he can do. November becomes December. The darkest month, the longest nights. Thomas marks the winter solstice in his log. December 21st, 1784. Overcast sky, wind from northwest. Light burning from 4 in the afternoon until past 8 in the morning. 16 hours of darkness. Shortest day of the year. 16 hours of darkness means 16 hours of lamps burning. Heavy oil consumption. Thomas watches his stores carefully. He has enough, but not by a wide margin. If the supply boat can't come in January, he'll be running very low by February. He rations carefully, trims the wicks precisely, makes sure not to overfill the reservoirs, which can cause wasteful spillage. Every drop of oil must count. Christmas approaches. Thomas doesn't celebrate it elaborately. He's alone, after all. But he allows himself a small recognition of the day, uses some of his precious stores for something special. On Christmas Day, he makes a proper meal. Boils some of the salt pork, but prepares it more carefully than usual. Makes gravy. Cooks potatoes from his garden harvest. Mashes them with a bit of the butter he's been saving. Boils some of his dried beans until they're tender. He has a bit of dried fruit. Apples and raisins that came on the last supply boat. He stews these with a little sugar. Makes a simple pudding. It's not fancy, but by his standards, it's a feast. He sits at his table and eats slowly, thinking about Mary, thinking about Christmases past when he was home from sea and they celebrated together. Simple celebrations, but warm, full of love. He thinks about his sister and her family. They'll be celebrating today too, with more people, more food, more joy. He hopes they're well, hopes they're warm and safe and happy. After dinner, he reads from the Bible. The Christmas story. Familiar words. Shepherds and angels, and a baby in a manger. The promise of light in the darkness. Thomas finds comfort in it. We all need light in the darkness, he thinks. His light here in the tower, God's light in the world. Both are needed. He climbs to the lantern room for the evening lighting. The lamps burn bright as always. The beam sweeps across the Christmas darkness. There might be ships out there. There might be men far from home, working through the holy day. For them, this light. For them, this vigil kept. The final week of December is bitterly cold. Frost forms thick on everything. The well develops ice around its edges. Thomas has to break through a skin of ice each time he draws water. The path to the well is treacherous, slippery. He moves carefully, carrying his buckets, watching each step. His room in the tower is cold despite the stove burning. The heat rises, doesn't stay down here. Thomas sleeps under every blanket he owns, still wakes shivering in the deepest hours of the night. But the light burns. Every night, without fail, Thomas makes his checks every 2 hours, climbing those 73 steps again and again. His knees ache. His back aches. His whole body aches with cold and fatigue. But he climbs. He checks. He makes sure the light is burning bright. On New Year's Eve, Thomas stays awake through midnight. He wants to mark the turning of the year consciously. Wants to acknowledge that he's survived another year, made it through. At midnight, he stands in the lantern room, watching his light sweep across the water. Sees the year 1784 become 1785, sees one set of days become another. But really, what changes? The work continues, the sea continues, the light must burn. He thinks about the year just ended. 4 seasons at St. Catherine's Light, 4 complete cycles of weather and work, ships guided safely past, a few lost despite everything. His garden grown and harvested, maintenance completed, duty fulfilled. He thinks about the year ahead. It will be much the same. The seasons will turn, the weather will change, ships will pass, the light will burn, and he will tend it. That's his purpose. That's what gives his life structure and meaning. Thomas says his prayers. For Mary's soul, for the souls of the sailors lost at sea, for his sister and her family, for his own strength to continue, for the light that burns above him. Then he goes to bed. Tomorrow is the first day of a new year. The work will be the same, but it will be new work nonetheless. Each day is new, even when the tasks are familiar. Each night the light must be lit fresh. Each dawn brings its own duties. As Thomas settles into sleep, he thinks about the lighthouse keeper who came before him, and the one who will come after. This tower has stood for decades, will stand for decades more. The keepers change, but the light continues. The watch is kept. The duty is passed from hand to hand across the years. And that's what matters, Thomas thinks as sleep takes him. Not the individual keeper, but the continuity, the light that never fails, the vigilance that never wavers, the promise kept, night after night, year after year. Above him, the light turns, casting its beam across the dark water, flash, dark, flash, dark. The heartbeat of the lighthouse, the rhythm that never stops. 2 flashes per minute. Street, Catherine's Light. Present and accounted for, doing its duty. And Thomas sleeps, knowing the light will still be burning when he wakes. Knowing he will check it, tend it, keep it burning through another day, another night. As he has done, as he will do, as keepers before him have done, and keepers after him will do. The light endures, the watch is kept, and that is enough. And so the year turns full circle. Thomas has kept his light burning through all of it, through winter storms and summer calms, through the long dark and the brief brightness of midsummer, through loneliness and duty and the small satisfactions of work well done. His is not a dramatic life. There are no great adventures, no heroic deeds, no moments of glory, just the quiet persistence of showing up, of doing the work, of climbing those 73 steps again and again, of polishing reflectors and cleaning glass and trimming wicks, of watching the sea in all its moods, of being there, night after night, keeping the light burning. But perhaps that's what most of life is, in the end. Not the grand gestures, but the small ones, repeated. Not the moments of glory, but the long hours of patient work. Not the dramatic rescues, but the quiet prevention of disasters through simple diligence. The light that keeps burning. The watch that's faithfully kept. The duty that's fulfilled even when no one is watching. Especially when no one is watching. Thomas will continue through 1,785 and 1,786, and however many years he has strength to do the work, until age forces him to retire, or illness, or the sea claims him as it has claimed so many. But for now, for this moment, the light burns, the tower stands, the watch is kept, and somewhere out there in the darkness, a ship sees the flash, counts the interval, 2 flashes, streak Catherine's light. The captain adjusts his course slightly, steers his ship away from the rocks, continues safely on his way, perhaps never thinking about the man in the tower, the solitary keeper who made that safe passage possible. But Thomas doesn't need thanks, doesn't need recognition. The work itself is enough. The knowledge that he's doing something worthwhile, something necessary, keeping a light burning in the darkness. What greater purpose could there be? Sleep well, friends. Let the rhythm of the waves carry you to rest. Let the turning of the light mark the slow passage of time. Let the steadiness of Thomas's work remind you that some things endure, that some lights keep burning through the darkness, that some watches are faithfully kept year after year, season after season, night after night. Let the sound of wind around the tower lull you. Let the distant cry of seabirds fade into your dreams. Let the endless motion of the sea rock you gently to sleep. And know that somewhere on a rocky headland, in a tower of stone and iron, a light is burning, has been burning, will continue burning, steady and faithful. A point of certainty in an uncertain world. Good night.